Welcome back. Now, our next guest was at the heart of the Brexit negotiations until this summer, when he dramatically quit over the Prime Minister's Chequers proposal. So what does former Brexit Secretary David Davis make of the situation we're in at the minute? Well, let's find out, shall we? Thank you very much for being with us early on this Sunday morning. It's appreciated. Now, this is presumably the last Conservative Party conference before we leave the European Union. Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary, on the front pages of the newspapers today, describing the current proposal on the table as deranged. What's the adjective that you would choose to describe the Chequers plan?
Just wrong. I mean, Boris specialises in more dramatic language than me, but it's just wrong. I mean, it just doesn't do either what the referendum led people to expect, bring back control of laws. It absolutely explicitly doesn't do that, and it doesn't bring back control of borders. So those two things straight away, and it's much more than that, but just two things straight away. It doesn't meet our referendum promise, or indeed our manifesto promise. So it's not something. Even when it's done, even when it's concluded, if we got Chequers, the Europe issue wouldn't go away. The toothache we've had for 30 years on this subject would still be there for another 20 years. So it's not the right answer.
So, you can't help but thinking, we're here, aren't we, in a situation 6 months before we leave the European Union. Theresa May says that the only credible proposal on the table is Chequers. You say that it's wrong. You've got to take some responsibility for that, haven't you? Because you were Brexit Secretary for 2 years.
Well, you should read my resignation letter. I mean, I told her at each stage where I thought we were going the wrong way, from the way we started negotiations immediately after the election campaign, the concession on Ireland in December. I said, no, that's not the right way to go. The Prime Minister, at the end of the day, is the lead negotiator. She decides. At each stage, I thought, well, maybe I can make that work, even though I don't think it's right. But eventually, I got the point, you can't make it work. It is so far off what is the right strategy.
So why did they listen to you? Because you've got to take responsibility for that, then, haven't you? You failed to have any influence. Oh, yeah, well, and I do. I say, I failed to persuade the Prime Minister. That's quite right. And the simple truth, however, is you've got a whole system here. I mean, if you added up all the permanent secretaries who voted to leave the European Union, I suspect you'd come to the answer zero. The whole of Whitehall has a particular perspective, and I think, as I've said already, they misread Europe. They misread the way the negotiations should be played. They also misread what was an acceptable outcome for the British people. Now, all of those things, one man couldn't stop. One of the reasons for resigning was to make it absolutely plain that this issue was not capable of being resolved the way the government was going. I couldn't do that in government. I always, in government, in cabinet, took the view, I'm not going to brief, I'm not going to spin, I'm not going to talk against my colleagues. You can only do that outside the cabinet. That's why I resigned. So who is to blame then? Is it Theresa May? Is it the officials around her? Is it Ollie Robbins?
Oh, it's a mixture of all. I mean, I don't pick out individuals. I mean, I know people love to pick on an individual, but actually, it's the whole system. It's stacked in a certain way.
And by the system, do you mean the civil service?
The civil service, the advisory group, all these people, and the simple truth is that actually there is a resolution, and by the way, you say it's only 6 months. Actually, that's plenty of time, bluntly. I've always said to the Prime Minister from the beginning, the issue in this is going to be the last month. It's not going to be the 2 years that run up to it. It's going to be the last month, because the European Union always uses time, always tries to pressurise you, always takes you to what they call the cliff edge, and then sees if you panic.
So you think there will be a deal then?
Yeah, I think there will be a deal. I think it's 80–90% likely there'll be a deal, and I think actually the deal will end up as something like what Boris calls Super Canada, what somebody else called Free Trade Plus, basically a free trade-based deal. But we're going to have a very scary few months. Between now and about November, it's going to be really scary. Everybody's going to be calling each other's bluff. There's all sorts of brinkmanship going to go on. That's normal. That's the European Union, daily bread, and that's what we've got to be ready for. That's why we're making the argument now. That's why it was important to resign in July, because we've got to make the arguments in the last round. Chequers won't fly. It won't fly in Europe, and it won't fly in Parliament. So
Brussels won't accept Chequers. You disagree with Boris Johnson there, then?
Well, no, I think, what Brussels may well do is add a few more things on. Well, a lot of people don't like Chequers even more, think it's the absolute last step you can go. We've made all the concessions we can. So Brussels will want to put something else on. They want to put customs union on. They want to put, some other requirements, money or immigration or whatever. And she hasn't got any room for that. I afraid. So I think Chequers will die, one way or another, either in Brussels or in Westminster, and then we'll need another alternative. And that's why I wrote that alternative last year, over a year ago.
Well, let's talk about the alternatives that are on offer, because there's a bit of an inconvenient truth, isn't there, with the alternatives on offer, and that is the Irish border situation. It's very serious what happens with that border.
Well,
what's your solution?
I don't accept the phrase an inconvenient truth. I think it's an inconvenient exaggeration. And the reason is, I mean, I'm reasonably familiar with the Irish border over the course of 20 years or so. There's already a border there. There's a customs border, there's a judicial border, there's a currency border. Those borders all operate invisibly. You know, the only way you can tell is the colour of the stripe in the middle of the road changes colour as you go over the border. But the customs operation, by talking to each other, the Irish and Northern Ireland customs managed to catch lots of smugglers. There was a massive cigarette haul only a few weeks ago. It can be done.
But you talk about things such as, currency border, for example. I mean, there's a difference, isn't there, between taking some euros over the border in your pocket and back again, and taking some sheep over the border, for example. I mean, it's a different kind of border that we're talking about here, isn't it? And it's not helpful, really, is it, to try and oversimplify?
Well, the people are oversimplifying it, the Irish government and the Commission, by saying, oh, you've got to have a sweeping political answer. There is no acceptable sweeping political answer. What they have to do is look at the detail of tax on the border. Because it's tax. The biggest thing, you're right. It doesn't matter whether you carry a euro or a pound. You can buy your drinks in Belfast in euros, and you can buy in Dublin in pounds. The simple truth is, it's tax, which we deal with already. It's regulations, which is the hardest one, and it's what they call rules of origin. That is, goods coming from the rest of the world going into Europe by a, quote, back door through Belfast. We can control that. There are only 5 ports in the north of Ireland, 5 big ports. We can control that bit of it. The issue is regulation. And you're right, it's cattle going backwards and forwards across the border, it's milk going backwards and forwards across the border, it's that sort of thing.
And it's important, isn't it? I mean, you're a military man, you know how important, how sensitive this is.
Yeah,
I mean,
of course.
we're still trying to find bodies.
I raised Ireland
of young people who died not long ago.
Yeah, So I knew some of them, but I raised this in negotiation before the Commission did. For exactly that reason. I think there's a moral responsibility there.
So it's not an exaggeration, is it? It's a hugely important...
No, what I'm saying is the problem is being exaggerated, not the importance. I must distinguish between that. And the regulatory stuff, well, there are already special arrangements for Northern Ireland which apply. It's a single epidemiological zone. So, when you take cattle into Northern Ireland, you do have to inspect them, so you can protect that. There are special regulatory arrangements. The other thing that's unified between the north and south is what's called a single electricity market. So you have special arrangements for Northern Ireland electricity generators. So, without putting that border in the Irish Sea, you can do significant detailed changes, and they're not even looking at that.
So would you
accept... We were talking to the Irish government before Mr Varadkar came into power, and they were talking about these things, and all of a sudden it's all stopped. Now it's being used for political reasons. It's a very important issue, but what's being exaggerated is the difficulty of resolving it. We can do it, and look, I tell you, the best test, rather than disappear into the details, your viewers should just ask themselves, who do they believe on this? David Trimble on Northern Ireland, the Nobel Prize winner who put his life on the line to create the Irish peace process, or Barnier or Juncker? Trimble supports the arguments I've put about resolving the Irish border issue.